Welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. If you desire to intimately connect with yourself, your significant other, children, family, friends, community, and higher power, this show is for you. We explore intimate topics, inspiring life stories, spirituality, and insightful tips on strengthening relationships. The show is hosted by Dr. April and her co-host, Coach K. Let's get this episode of the Bringing Intimacy Back show started. We share with you today the secret power to intimacy to create a life you love or love the life you create. Now, here's your host, Dr. April, and co-host, Coach K.
Hey, welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. How are you doing, Coach K?
I am doing amazing. How about yourself?
Good. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. All I can think about is I don't have any more leftovers. I love food, so that's the only sad part. How about yourself?
No, it's wonderful taking the time off to just be with family, and to just relax.
Yeah, that is definitely a great part of it. I got to see because we went to my daughter's house, so I didn't have to do anything but eat.
Okay, yes. Yeah, and I'm not really a cook at all, so I don't really cook, but everybody in my family does. So being able to share a meal and that kind of stuff. I think holidays bring such an intimate moment.
Yes, it really does.
Where you can, just lay your hair down and that kind of stuff.
Reconnect, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. The other thing that I know holidays bring for many people is struggling with depression and anxiety. In fact, December is one of the highest months for suicide because people feel very lonely.
Absolutely. I think that the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I did a quick, I had to do a Tuesday night show, and we did, it's called Who's Home for the Holidays.
Right.
And I talked about it briefly, that many emotions, whether they are centered around holidays or not, even the passing of a loved one, this time bubbles those feelings that you've suppressed for so long. You just have, because you're off, it's vacation time. You kind of have to sit still a little bit because things are not as hustle and bustle on certain days. So it forces you to face things that you may not be ready to face.
Mm-hmm. And I would also say people sometimes have to face their family.
Yes.
So it brings up, for some people, family trauma and that kind of stuff.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It can be very overwhelming. So I'm glad what our topic today is, because there's help out there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you've got anxiety, if you've got depression, and you're like, I've been trying to maybe talk to my family or friends, and maybe you're not getting that comfort you need or help with the healing process or being able to trust that person. So you're thinking of, well, should I try therapy? Should I try psychotherapy? And today, that's what we're going to talk about. We have an expert coming on to talk about how psychotherapy can be a very intimate type of relationship when you work with a professional, but it's how you select that professional
Right.
process. Yeah, so I'm excited. We have a special guest today. Her name is Silvia. I'm going to mispronounce it, but she'll correct me later. Dutchevici. So before I really get a chance to talk about her, I just want to talk a little bit about our charity of the month, because we started December, which is a holiday month. And one of the greatest organizations in December is Toys for Tots.
Mm-hmm. I'm an approved drop-off location, so I love Toys for Tots.
Oh, awesome. You are. Good. Yeah. And it's a great organization, especially here in Florida, in Southwest Florida. There are many families who've lost everything in the storm. So Toys for Tots, it's a way you can donate money so children can get toys, because toys for little ones, it's really important. It helps you develop social skills, and many times the things you play, you end up becoming. I used to play with Barbie dolls all the time, creating stories, drama, and now I'm a therapist. So, yeah.
And being able to receive something feels good.
Right. Many people are not able to receive. And which also ties back into therapy, because when you're in therapy, you're able to talk, let things off, but also receive feedback. Yes.
Yeah.
So when we come back, we're going to dive in and talk with our guests. So if you're out there and you've got a lot of stuff going on and you're like, I don't know about counseling, therapy, talking to somebody stranger, please tune in, because that's where we're going to address it. All right, we'll be back in a moment.
Life can be overwhelming sometimes. We think we are a burden to others. We think that it's better to hide it and suppress our hurt, but it's not. As Cave Coral Therapists, we will provide you with quality, confidential counseling services in a relaxing and peaceful environment. Talk to a professional today. Book an appointment on www.cavecoraltherapist.com or call 239-565-6921.
Welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. Welcome, Silvia.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be here with both of you and to talk about one of my favorite topics, therapy.
Yes. How do you pronounce your last name? Because I messed it up, and so.
Oh, it's so difficult. It's Dutchevici, so no worries. Just call me Silvia. Everyone calls me Silvia because otherwise it would be impossible to have a conversation with me.
Yes, definitely. So our topic today is about psychotherapy and how it's one of the most intimate relationship. So I love to hear people's definition of the word intimate or intimacy. What is your definition?
It's a very interesting question. I think it's about the ability to be authentic with someone and to be seen by someone. And I know we've all heard about vulnerability and sort of sharing emotions, but sometimes because it's become such pop culture, I think we mistaken vomiting our feelings towards, to people as intimacy, and that is not. It is really about feeling authentic and feeling seen and needed,
All right. Yeah, well, guess what? In being seen, we just have our first question that I'm just going to go ahead and start it off. Thank you, JJ George. JJ George asks, can you speak about self-care and unresolved issues?
Sure. So self-care, again, our culture talks about self-care everywhere, and we are taught to practice it. We're supposed to do it. And I almost have a little pet peeve around it because I think it has become sort of like something that's very pressurizing and very scary for people, or another task. And it shouldn't be that. And self-care doesn't have to be a targeted goal of, I need to paint because that's my self-care. It could be, I need to take a bubble bath because that's what makes me happy. Or I need to just take a walk, or even watch a TV show. I think we've created like sort of tiers of appropriate self-care, which often is a task rather than the ability to unwind. As far as unresolved issues, until they're resolved, they will always be with us. Part of resolving it requires, of course, I'm going to say therapy because I'm a therapist. But what it requires is the ability to tell our narrative and to understand what has happened to us. Sometimes we carry someone else's narrative. Sometimes we carry intergenerational traumas. Sometimes we are stuck in the past. And in order to move on, we have to be able to process it. And we have to be able to talk to someone about it.
Right, definitely. And I would also say with unresolved issues is being able to sometimes talk about it without feeling like you're actually there. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes when people enter therapy in the beginning, they're talking about stuff. And I have to remind them that nothing's changed. We're just talking. You're still safe. But it comes,
Yeah, and it's and that's because you're so activated right? By definition, trauma is not something that has happened to you, although it may have happened in the past, but something that you're experiencing in the present. So the goal is to be able to process those emotions, that you can talk about them as a memory rather than as a lived experience.
Yeah. And I love what you said about self-care, because I truly do see that it's become an added layer of, oh no, something else to do. I have to make this appointment to go get my nails done, or I'm supposed to do XYZ. So I'm glad you spoke to that. I did a self-care Sundays series with that show different things that you can do. And like you said, it's something that's, I know that when I need to take care of me, I watch a mindless show. Like I will binge watch something on Netflix and I'm like, I'm in heaven.
Yeah, and I think it's important not to judge ourselves of, oh, I'm watching TV, that's not appropriate. If you are relaxing, then it's very appropriate, and do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was just going to comment what you said, Coach K. Like for me, I get my nails done often, but it's not self-care. I find the whole thing tedious. yeah. But for me, going and doing improv is self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And self-care, I think it's really important, especially as therapists or people or nurses or people who give a lot. Yeah.
Oh, and especially for healthcare providers after COVID or during COVID, we're still in the midst of a recovery from COVID, but it has taken a very hard toll, especially on therapists, because we held a lot. We had to, sit through stories of loss and anxiety while we were also experiencing our own sort of feelings and anxieties. So it's been a rough ride.
Yes, definitely. And so I know that you are a social worker and you actually focus a lot on what we call critical therapy.
Yes.
Yeah. What exactly does that mean?
So critical therapy combines, 3 different schools, which is psychoanalysis, critical pedagogy, and liberation psychology. So that's the boring part. The exciting part, or how I came to critical therapy, was because I trained psychoanalytically, so in talk therapy, and to be a good clinician is considered to leave the political space out, to not really sort of analyze how issues such as racism, sexism, and so forth impact and affect your mental health. And then as a social worker, I saw the other part, which is about structural analysis and empowering people to be able to change their environments. Now, what I wanted to do was to make sure that those 2 very different schools of thought talk with each other and come together in the clinical space, in therapy. Because the truth is, mental health wellness is always intertwined and interrelated with our political realities, with our histories, our multiplicity of identities, and our relation to power in society.
Right. And I do think just even taking just the one thing of gender, that impacts you in therapy, who you even select as a therapist. If you're a female and you select a male, or if you're trans and you select a male or female, or you select the same sex. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it impacts whom you select. It also impacts how you show up in the world, and how you show up in that space of psychotherapy. What's interesting to me is that whenever we talk about issues of race, class, gender, and so forth, which are with us all the time, sometimes in unspoken ways, we only talk about it through differences. So the example that you gave around gender, I wonder how many men and people who identify as male end up going to therapy with another male and talk about gender or sexism. And they should, but they might not, because they're like, well, we're the same. It doesn't really impact us, but of course it does. So it's really important that we critically look and analyze our place in society and how it impacts who we are.
Right. And I think in therapy, you can learn so much And sometimes it has been so powerful to select a therapist who is opposite you. I had a gentleman who uh, didn't really have a good interactions with Black people. This was way back in the beginning. Okay. And so when he walked in, he didn't know that I was Black. But in the years of working with him, I learned so much. He learned so much.
And
that took time.
Yeah, and hopefully he has sort of changed some of his perspective, right?
Yes. Yeah, he changed some of his perspective, but guess what? I changed some of mine on how a person grows up like that.
Right.
Yeah, I have a more of an understanding. So it was a great thing in that aspect.
And I
think complicated.
Yeah, and I also think that good therapy needs to encompass this type of critical thinking or difficult discussions across genders, across race. So even if ideally, if he came to critical therapy, even if he ended up seeing white male, they would still have conversations about race because we don't live in the bubble. They exist, they impact our mental health, they impact how we show up, and they impact our relationship to privilege. All of us have some sort of privilege, and all of us, can use it for good or bad. As a white woman, right? I have to recognize that I do have that privilege. Now I can use it to help others. I could use it for good, or I could pretend I don't have it, and then I'm not helping anyone.
Yeah. And I was saying that all of those things that you named have become complicated. And I think it's because they're being acknowledged and explored more, and we're more open to talk about it. Like gender used to be a simple thing, and now it's not. And so knowing that there are places such as therapy where you can go and process it appropriately, because I think a lot of tensions and angers and frustrations in the world today stems around the complication that has come from it's no longer just this one thing, and it's okay. So being able to sit with someone such as you both in therapist or myself as a coach and walk through that, it matters. Like you with the guy, it opened up a sort of intimacy with you that now opens up an intimacy outside of your office.
Right. And this goes back to this idea of why therapy is a very intimate relationship. When people call me for therapy, I say, therapy is the most intimate relationship you end up having with someone. And they're like, what? But it is because there's this one place where you tell one person, ideally, everything. And you really reveal yourself, and you are able to look at your life and reckon with a lot of things in a space with someone that you may not do with anyone else. But I think, one of the problems with our society is that it has taken this word intimacy and sort of commercialized it into either a transactional thing. Like I give you something, you give me something, now we're intimate. And often that's related to sex, right? I remember I said to someone that therapy is one of the most intimate relationship we end up having with someone. And they said, but you're not having sex with your patients. And that was fascinating to me, that we're so ingrained to think intimacy equals sexuality, which it could. But it doesn't. We could be intimate with our children. We could be intimate with our friends. We could be intimate with different people in our lives, but we have lost that. And I think that's because we lost this sense of community, this sense of, being in relationship with others where we're not looking to get something out of them or exchange something. I love you, you love me, I do this, you do that for me, and so forth.
Yeah, some of the more happier people in life don't live through the expectation of, and that's why I love me, because I don't expect anyone to do or be anything other than who they are. So if I do something, it's because I wanted to, and I don't expect that if I call you next to ask that you just do it unless you want to.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it requires, as we've been talking about, is a lot of trust. And many times people have a hard time trusting other people. And what I also see is people have a hard time trusting themselves.
Hmm.
Which
And
is a great reason to go to therapy.
Yeah, and as I say to people, if you've been betrayed, and most people who end up coming to therapy have dealt with some interpersonal trauma or issue, right? Someone in your life has hurt you, something has happened to you that, is deeply problematic and hurtful. So it is difficult to trust. And I don't think you should trust your therapist right away, because that would not be an authentic relationship, right?
Right.
When people say, oh, well, I pay you, therefore I trust you. It doesn't work like that, because you pay me for my time. You don't actually pay me for my investment. So
Right.
it is a genuine human experience, and trust develops over time. I also believe that therapy could be a blueprint for all other relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, if you've been hurt, if your own parents, sort of done unspeakable things to you, it is difficult to go out there and try to trust someone, and let's see how it goes. But if you end up going to therapy, through the process of opening up to your therapist, learning how to trust them, and ideally not getting disappointed, it creates a possibility, an actual experience that something could be different. I think most of us think that we could change, or things could be different. Oh, I'm going to trust this person, I'm going to be different. But experientially, if you've never had that experience, it is really difficult to enact it. And therapy is like a playground of trying these things, because as I often say, my intention as a therapist is not to hurt you, and I'm very intentional. So if we could create that space, and if we could get to that place where we have a trustful relationship, then it's so much easier to have one outside in the real world.
Right, definitely. Yes. I want to thank QB Kennels for listening. So if there are people out there that are listening, they're like, how do I find a good therapist? How do I even know who I should talk to?
Excellent question. I think it is so important to find a person that you jive with and that you match with. However, I also say this: if you end up going to a therapist and every session is great, you always feel validated, you are never challenged, never angry, you either A, don't need therapy, or B, you're not doing the work. So a good therapist is someone that you feel you can connect with, but that will push you and challenge you to really look at those things in your life that are difficult to look at, and also be, empathic in the sense of be present with you to go through those hard moments, right? Because we people heal themselves, right? Just like people empower themselves. We can't do that for anyone, but we can create space and be there with you. And my job, and every therapist that is good out there, our job is to make sure we ask you the right questions, because you ultimately have the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this to everyone who wants to come see me. I say, if you have never been to therapy before, I would like for you to have a consultation with someone else as well, to see the difference. It's sort of like, you probably wouldn't get married to the first person that you meet. And even if that was the right match, you will always have doubts that there's something better out there. So I would like for you to go have 1 or 2 consultations with 2 different people, and then pick the person that you feel matches you and challenges you and could help you to get to where you are.
I like that you said that, because I do feel like some people's like, all right, I pick you, and after about 3 weeks, if it just seems stagnant, because you're the transparent best friend at this point. You can tell me everything, but I'm not going to be your yes woman. I'm not going to just say, oh, that's fine. I'm going to say, now let's think about this. Why would you do this? So that's a very good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it also, like you said, models what they should do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And it opens up the possibility of something different. I think it's not only that you learn how to have a relationship with another person, you also learn how to create spaces that other people can interact with you differently, and I think that's really important.
Right. And it's also important for people out there listening to be okay to share. Sometimes people worry about, oh my gosh, is that going to really affect the therapist?
Right,
But
right.
yeah, but we're trained to hear those things.
We are trained, and I'm going to be a little different than most therapists. I do think it should affect us to some degree. Not the fact that we go home and we cry and we can't function. That means that clearly we have some unresolved issues that are triggering for us. But it's a human experience. We hear these stories, and I say I live with my patients because we share moments together. We hear horrible stories sometimes, and then we also see the transformation of a person that you've seen sometimes for a few years, and then you see how they're in a better place. So it does impact us in a very human way. And again, I think that that's also important for people to hear, because sometimes we tend to create this myth that therapists are not people, and that seems okay because it's sort of like, well, it doesn't affect you. But if we're not people, then it's not really a genuine human experience.
Right, that's true.
And then it's very different. This is one of the reasons also, that I created critical therapy, where, we have different stages of how our relationship looks like with our patient, but especially at some point in the treatment, it is a more collaborative space. The reason I wanted to do that was because in traditional therapy, people come and talk about themselves, and then they keep talking about themselves, and then therapy ends and they feel healed, and parts of them are, and then wow, they don't know how to have a healthy relationship, because nowhere else in any other relationship can you just talk about yourself.
Right.
Yes, yeah, you're right. And I'm glad that you mentioned over years, because there's some insurance and healthcare and a variety of other stuff that feels like therapy needs to be, 6 weeks, 2 weeks, bing, bing, bang.
Yeah, and that is because of insurance, and it's because of our, sort of the monopoly that the insurance companies have over health decisions, right? They really make the decisions for us, unfortunately.
Right.
And, as I often tell people, it took you 20, 30, 40 years to get here. I don't think we could get to it in 3 months. And also because most people in the beginning, they're on their best behavior, and everything's great, and then 6 months in, you really get to the root of the issues. And I will also say that the reason why we at critical therapy have a sliding scale, which is everyone has a sliding scale, but our sliding scale is really based on income and resources, meaning that a person could pay as little as, let's say, $50 per session or $1,000 for a session. The reason we do that is, well, there are many reasons. The first one, which relates to this idea of health insurance, is that we wanted to make sure that good therapeutic services are also affordable. Oftentimes they're not. Right. People who end up getting good therapy and could spend years analyzing their lives and heal are not usually people who are less affluent. But we wanted to make sure that we see people from all walks of life. And what we did is we basically have people who have money subsidize for the people who don't have money. Right. And so that's the sort of political, quote unquote, reason. But there's also a deep psychological reason. One of the things I discovered is that our relationship with money is very complicated. It hides a lot of things, because money hides a lot of things. And to have these conversations in therapy is therapeutic. Moreover, especially for affluent people, they never really get to explore their feelings around money because they don't get to talk about money. If you think about it, especially in therapy, who talks about money? People who does not have money, because they need to negotiate the fee, ask about the insurance. Whereas in usual therapy, if your fee is, let's say, $200 or whatever, a person who has money pays you, and we never approach this topic again. And I think there's something that we're missing in how one sees themselves, in one's relationship to power, to privilege, to shame. A lot of affluent people have shame around their wealth. Instead of using it for good, they try to pretend they don't have it, which is not helping anyone, and so forth.
Yeah, wow, that was powerful what you just said.
Yeah.
And it also makes me think about some of my clients, because sometimes we don't talk about money, unless it's, I deal with couples, unless it's in a couple relationship. But yeah, but this is a great thing that you mentioned, and it's a safe space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also it's and money is a good example of this. Sometimes what we think we believe is not what we actually believe or live our lives, right? So I've had a lot of people who are like, yes, I really believe in income redistribution and I want to give to charity. And then when they're sitting in that chair and we're talking about paying $1,000 a session, they're like, whoa, that's like a lot. What's happening here? Right? Because we theoretically it sounds good, but when you actually viscerally have to live those politics, that's a little different,
It's different. I had a potential client call and ask, because they were on the website, and I went through the rundown of, calls, and they laughed and said, "Are you kidding me?" Right? And I was like, "No." That's the value and the worth. It's pretty sure less than a divorce attorney. So you can weigh your options there.
Yeah, and I feel like that speaks to our society's lack of respect for mental health, right? I mean, I don't know a lot of people who end up going to a heart surgeon or a knee doctor and saying, "What? You charging me that for the surgery?" No, I don't think so. I'm going to find someone cheaper, right? But because we value our physical health and we've been taught that it's important. We say we value mental health, but the insurance companies does not really reimburse at the same rate that they reimburse a psychiatrist or a medical doctor. Our patients don't feel like they should be spending on therapy, and I think it's because deep down we don't really value it.
Right,
because you can't see it.
Right, or even the states, they don't pay much for help for mental health and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Silvia, this has been awesome. So if people out there listening, how can they find you? And of course, let's talk about your great book that you wrote on critical therapy. Where can they find the book?
Thank you. So the book is Critical Therapy, Power and Liberation in Psychotherapy. It is everywhere you want to find it, which is Amazon, Barnes and Noble, some local bookstores as well. If you go to our website, which is criticaltherapy.org, you'll find all the resources. You'll find what we do. You'll also find stuff about the book and where you can get it.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for providing services for people who may not be able to afford it.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's so important. One of the things I wanted to do is it's twofold. I wanted to make sure that I provide services to people who couldn't afford it, but I also wanted to make sure that the clinicians who work with us, the psychotherapists, have a living wage. Right. And I don't mean a minimum wage, right? And that's been the problems, especially social workers and therapists, is that they end up working in these agencies where they're doing the good work because they're working with low-income folks, but they get burned out because they're not making enough money. They can't afford to, get a bigger apartment, start a family. And all of a sudden they feel, oh, well, I can't do this. And then they either get out of the profession or sell out, quote unquote. As long as we have this dichotomy of doing good work means you're poor, doing sellout work means you're affluent and rich, the system will never change. So we need to make sure that we can do good work and also have a sustainable life, work-life balance, and really feel that we're helping people and do both, which is we could do the good work and we could also have a decent life.
Right. And I also want to thank you for letting the audience know that you can come into therapy and not only just talk about your anxiety symptoms, but you can talk about race. You should talk about money. Talk, of course, about sex and other difficult topics, religion. This is the space.
Yes. And it's because those issues you may not be aware of it at first, but they're always interrelated. You know, if, you know, issues of anxiety are interrelated to issues of sexuality, for example, or race or class. It's not, we live in a society. So to really sort of take out the mental health component, just talk about symptoms, that means we're not really addressing you as a person. And whether you like it or not, you know, especially if you're a person of color, you are affected by racism. You may not realize it, but you are, and there is no escaping it. So there has to be a space where people can talk about it. I will also say this, because I'm not naive, right? That I discovered that there's a lot of therapists out there that are not well equipped to deal with these issues or talk about those issues. And especially for folks of color, they've gone to therapists, especially white therapists, because, you know, who say who say they're not microaggressions, they're really aggressions. And I think it's our job, right? And as clinicians, and this is why, you know, critical therapy trains therapists, because I think most people who turn out to be therapists want to help people, but I think some of them just don't really have the skills to have these difficult conversations that are so necessary. And they could actually end up hurting someone or teaching the patient who comes in wanting to talk about these issues that you should never discuss this.
Yeah. Powerful. That was
Yeah.
That was good. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. And so one last thing, what I also heard you say now, so I kind of knew about you, is that criticaltherapy.org also provides training for therapists.
Yes, we provide training for therapists in New York City. And now we're looking at creating some workshops so we could actually train people out there that really need it. I think New York City is diverse enough, and you might get that therapist that's not going to say something racist or sexist to you. Right. But I also think in Middle America, you might not get that. And again, it's not because those therapists are bad. I think they just don't know how to have these conversations, and we need to educate them. It's our responsibility.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much for being on this show. You're welcome back anytime.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. This has been the Bringing Intimacy Back show. We'll take a break and we'll be back in a moment.
Sex should not be the elephant in the room. The fourth ebook of the Improving Intimacy book series, From Bringing Intimacy Back, It's All About Sex, helps you navigate every which way you can tend to your sex life. Pulling out all the stops, dive into the sensual read about sex toys, silky linens, and date nights. Improving Intimacy, It's All About Sex is available on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, and paperback. Search Dr. April Brown on Amazon to view all her books on improving intimacy for yourself, spouse, and more.
Welcome back to the Bringing Intimacy show, where intimacy is real. Wow, that was so powerful.
Oh, yes. And great words of wisdom and transparency. That is everything. That transparency is, I love transparency, if you can't tell.
So for people out there listening and they're saying, what is she talking about in the sense of the transparency?
It's that I'm not going to hide behind, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
Right.
I'm not going to hide behind, I'm worried about what you may think of me. I'm going to speak. It's honestly, to me, it's bigger than the truth, right? Because it's an entire being. So yeah, understanding that transparency is everything, is your authentic naked self in words.
Right. And I'm just thinking as she's training other therapists.
Yes.
Which is great. And so it's one of those things when you're looking for a therapist, if you see a therapist that has this type of training, that they can show up and provide a space, that they will be authentic, transparent, and a space for you to be that way too. Absolutely. Yes. I would definitely pick one of those trained therapists any day. Right. So what's coming up in a couple of weeks?
We have some great shows coming up. So on next week, December the 8th, we have Becoming Your CEO Self with Confidence. And that's going to be with Coach Antoine Billboard. And then on December the 15th, we have LGBTQIA plus kink communities and intimacy with Wesley Toma. And then on the 22nd of December and the 29th of December, we are going to bid you a happy holiday and a welcoming of the new year, because we're going to take some time away from the show to allow you time with your families and self.
Yes, definitely. Well, this has been the Bringing Intimacy Back show. If you like it, please like us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and definitely, as our topic was today about the intimacy of psychotherapy as one of the most intimate relationship, definitely check out criticaltherapy.org. If you missed out any of this, or if you want to check her out and her staff, we will see you guys next week. This has been the Bringing Intimacy Back show. See you guys later. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Bringing Intimacy Back, where intimacy is real. You can also find us at bringingintimacyback.com, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Dr. April Brown's 7-book series, Improving Intimacy, is now on Amazon. We'll see you next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe.